Good morning, everybody. I have to say that watching videos like that gets me so excited to go meet people and do things. So we had a little promo that just ran there for Manifest, which is an amazing supply chain conference. It says there are 4,500 attendees, guys. That's got to be one of the largest conferences that I have attended in this industry. I went last year for the first time. So much fun, and just one of the most diverse crowds of supply chain professionals I've ever seen. So it was a really cool blend of people, a little bit of everything: technology, brokers, carriers, shippers. And so it's a lot of fun. I will be heading there in February. If you guys are going or you want to go, check out the link in the comments. I just posted it. You guys can get $200 off your registration there. But also, I wanted to give a quick shout out. If you are going to Manifest or your company's attending, please reach out to me if you guys are interested in some content. I am looking for 6 partners. We're going to do some Meet Me for Coffee short clips. So if you're a fan of the show, we're going to be doing some abbreviated interviews, little 5 to 10 minute clips. And I would love to catch some of you guys there who listen to the show and go ahead and get you on to a short clip of the show. We are at our 1-year anniversary today, guys, for Meet Me for Coffee, which is crazy. I don't know how a year has already gone by, but we were just talking about this morning before we went live with my producer. So episode 26, this show happens every 2 weeks. And so we are at the 52-week mark. And I'm really excited to go ahead and bring in our guest today. I have Matt Blackledge. Matt is the Vice President of Enterprise Pricing at Dupre Logistics. I think I said everything right there. Good morning, yes. Matt. How are you doing?
Morning. Good. You know, just enjoy my lab of luxury here in my house that has a piano and lovely fireplace. I don't live in that nice of a house.
Preset backgrounds in my podcasting platform, and apparently the only options are like this really nice classic piano background or a brick wall. So we opted for that because coffee from home this morning,
I
right?
wanted something a little nicer than my office that has a closet behind it. So this works
No
well.
worries. I like it. It's a very comfortable vibe. That's kind of what we're going for here over a cup of coffee. So
That's it.
thanks so much for joining, Matt. I think for anyone who doesn't know, can you just give us a quick introduction of yourself, your
Sure.
background, what you have done, and then where you're at right now?
Yeah, definitely. So like Samantha said, Matt Blackledge, VP of Enterprise Pricing. I also have analytics and in market intel. But yes, I started in the industry back in 2003 as a transportation sales rep straight out of college at C.H. Robinson. Obviously, had no clue what I was doing first 3 to
Of
6
course.
months. Started in the old cradle to grave model. Inside in that model inside the office, I was a part of the Southeast pod. I don't know if anybody's on the call that remembers pods, but I was in the Southeast pod, managing carriers, booking several loads per day, building relationships, and eventually, had a few customer accounts to manage. Slowly over the next 7 years, this morphed into different types of split models, within the office branch environment. So I was an account management centric employee. Then I went into inside outside sales, and then I guess it was back in 2010 I came back in the office to become one of the first CAMs, or key account managers, if y'all remember those, to manage a large account, run a kind of a partial 4PL model outsource that we were doing. And then fast forward to 2013. I started engaging in pricing in the branch level and for spot and contract, and really started to feel this was my calling. And so, uh, about a year later in 2014, corporate leadership decided to regionally align a resource for offices to engage with. I applied, landed that opportunity, and that was called a regional pricing manager. So myself and about 10 others became the first corporately housed centralized pricing team. And there were 6 of us. They had oversight on about 150 plus offices. Myself, being in the Southeast, there was about 26 offices, and we had
Yeah.
four main responsibilities. So first, corporate resource for contract pricing. In those days, I'd say, 90s to 2010s, most RFPs were managed at the branch level. So we wanted to show we could help manage the process, utilize analysts to run data, import, export from bid sites, create functional file, to make decisions. You'd have me as a rep to drive strategy based on
Yeah.
history, relationship, needs, etc. Number 2 was just to educate on spot pricing tools, custom build in house, and then use dynamic forecasting guidance, on the spot side. Number 3 was just work closely with data science. We had just created a data science division. We wanted to help guide algorithms predicting future cost rate, as well as brainstorm on enhanced capabilities where that's concerned. And then lastly was us to be an extension of the account management team, building relationships in conjunction with account management with our clients through market intelligence, in QBRs, RFP negotiations, just bringing experience with larger accounts. I think I did 50 plus of those per year. I mean, it was a great experience, and it gave me opportunity to grow in multiple aspects of a career and life, and I'll always be grateful to CHR. Today, I'm at Dupre Logistics, based out of Lafayette, Louisiana, but we are all over America. I was approached about a yearish plus ago to become their VP and help
Yeah.
along an incredible staff and leadership personnel just to help grow a fast growing company. And so we have 3 divisions. ELS, which is our energy logistics services, has retail gas delivery, localized. That's how we got started. Our founder, Reggie Dupre, back in 1980, had a gas station, and he was getting frustrated with not having fast gas delivery. So he's like, I'm gonna
Hey,
start.
frustrations are the starts of great things, right? Like frustration can drive innovation. There you go.
Yeah. So he started his own company, and that was kind of how it started. Morphed from there. That's still a division. It's a smaller one. Morphed into private fleet services. We have
Yeah.
dedicated asset on-site logistics, and then we have our brokerage division. And so our moniker is asset right. We can pick between brokerage and asset and provide the right service for our clients and
Yeah.
customers. That's a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing today.
Yeah. I was like smiling and just kind of like reflecting on everything you were saying about, CHR, because 2 things. One, I started in a very similar path later,
Yeah.
but with a large company, and I did all those things that you said you did on the sales side, collaborating with pricing. But then 2, because when we talk about dates for like, oh, we switched to a corporate, a centralized pricing model, like it wasn't that long ago. Like it
Yeah.
really wasn't
No,
that long ago that companies started to go, hey, let's put more like strategy and tact behind how we're pricing freight. And
exactly.
so there's been so much development which is what we're going to kind of get into today, and like technology and just data that's available and pricing. And I feel like the bar is just so much higher now for
sure.
what companies should be expecting from their pricing teams when you're interacting with RFPs and customer lanes. So first question on that note for you.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
came from one of the largest logistics companies. You've come to a smaller one now, but can you talk to me a little bit before we jump into like what you're doing now and different tools that we're doing? Talk to me about kind of the difference in these large organizations, and I wouldn't say small organizations, but just that
Right, right,
there's
right.
several outliers, right, that are just so much larger than the rest. But in my mind, when we're talking pricing, one of the first things I go to is, are they kind of removed from the market because they have so much
Mhm.
historical and internal data just by sheer volume? That
Right.
is it almost like a different game that they're playing in where they're not having to look into the same data sources that other companies are, or how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with billions in revenue comes more access to data, right? You're able to see how capacity is performing in large scale environments.
Yeah.
I mean, you can dive into 3 to 5 digit specific areas and have a very large amount to show how rates are performing. What's your quote effectiveness, how are individuals pricing, what their win loss ratios, from a performance of verticals. You can look at your confidence scoring levels; those are much higher with large volumes. Custom build APIs for platforms,
Mhm.
right? Pricing,
Mhm.
buying capacity at scale, obviously has its advantages as well. I mean, when you can pull certain capacity into accounts if there's matching corridors. So, organizations of that size are moving anywhere from 2 to 6 million loads per year. So you're just naturally going to have more data. But I do think smaller brokerages may have the level of information, but can access through consortium data too, right? I'd say one advantage of Dupre that we have is just the fact that we do not only do we do common mode freight, but we do specialty freight, right? And that we are
Yeah.
able to aggregate, some of our largest clients through like liquid bulk and drayage and relationships we have with committed carriers from a drop trailer perspective. So, I think a lot of our customers love the fact that we have customer service and true hands-on approach where that's concerned. So, but
I think
because
there's to
go
that
ahead.
point, I think there's pockets of the industry that you can't like if we're going to talk about benchmarking where, someone like
Hmm.
C.H. Robinson kind of sets almost it almost seems I'm sure they benchmark externally. Maybe you could help
Oh yeah,
us with that. But like I'm sure they also
yeah,
just kind of base a lot of their data off of what they have. And then our other companies, we're trying to benchmark off of some other external data source as well. Obviously,
yep,
DAT has been one of the most notable and like longstanding benchmarking options. But I think that like there's gaps too in the industry when you get into specialty niches where it's like there really isn't a public benchmarking source. And I've heard shippers talk about this before in niches like maybe like produce, for example,
right,
where it's pretty specialized and the people who run it over and over and over again and they're not sourcing off of DAT. So
yep,
like you're not finding that data somewhere publicly to pull pricing on it or like specialized team freight. Like there's limited data
hmm,
on team like expedite loads when you're trying to pull from these public data sources as well. So
yeah,
so that's really interesting playing in a niche. It's almost like you kind of have that, like you are the benchmark to an extent
for
on
sure,
those specialized types, especially in certain geographies, I would guess. Have you kind of
yeah.
felt that to be true?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have to follow what the market's doing, right? And I mean, in this current market environment, all modes are being affected, right? Even
Right.
specialty. I think you can look at PPI and some of the outputs to show that it's falling in the same moniker. So we have to take our internal data, match it up against that, use that as it falls down to help us accurately price to the market.
Yeah. You
But
would
yeah,
say like external benchmarking then will always exist in some
oh,
capacity, regardless of
for
size of company.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, 20 years ago, I think, the addressable market for brokerage was less than 10%, right? When we started,
Right.
when you measure OTR assets, private fleets, that's kind of how it was. I think today I heard recently brokerage could be around 30%. Some people even think even higher when they look at billing data, right? I think Craig Fuller, he recently had a good article addressing the rise of brokerage and
Sure.
not the anticipated consolidation of assets like we thought like
Right.
would rule the
And I
market
think
over the years.
COVID really accelerated that. And I think we're gonna see like we're seeing a trimming down, I think, from the
Mhm.
numbers that were given to brokerages during the 2020, 2021 periods. But you're right. Like the addressable market for brokerage has expanded. And if people are like, wait, what are they talking about? Because sometimes I think we forget when you play in brokerage space, when you live in brokerage space, you forget how small you are, I think, in this
Mhm.
market. And basically, I think what we're talking about there is so much freight runs outside of brokerages, a majority of it, in fact, directly to assets. And that's not really being reported in a way that we can benchmark and track on. Those
Yeah.
rates aren't going onto DAT or Truckstop or other places. And so
Right.
when you really talk about like benchmarking in general in the brokerage space, like it's a minority percentage of the overall addressable market that's even being measured, I guess,
Yeah.
is what I
Yeah,
would say.
for
And so
sure.
the best way to try it, you have obviously sources, and this leads into a good question, actually. You have some
Yeah.
sources maybe who try to measure what shippers are paying to try to get a more realistic feel for the actual rates and stuff. But what are some, just talking about sources, we're talking about external benchmarking.
Yep.
What are some sources that you found over the years that you tend to look to or rely on either for rate benchmarking, but also maybe just for like understanding the market and understanding
Yeah.
a big part of pricing is being forward looking, right? And trying to predict what's going to be happening in the next 6 months and 12 months. And so maybe what are
Mhm.
some like macroeconomic indicators or data sources that you're following just to try to be as informed as you can when you're planning for pricing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think number one, like you said, DAT is the biggest player. I mean, $150 billion. It's a
Yeah,
must to see how your costs and rates are going, out the door and matching any given market. And they do a good job of aggregating that data and help you compare it to your own and
right.
understand that. I think, to bring in the shipper side of it, that them purchasing the FMIC data from Chainalytics to see, where your contract and spot rates are moving on the customer side is super helpful, right? To match up, how you're about to send rates out the door measured up against what they are seeing, and then what you think the comparative drop is in existing and where you think the future is going is just it's super beneficial, and we need to show customers that more and more. I think Green Screens is doing some incredible things over the last
Yeah.
12 months. I mean, their customer base has grown twofold, I think, over that 12-month period. I'm sure if one of them is on the phone right now, I'll butcher this and I apologize. I think it's around 30-ish billion right now. So it's a good amount of data. I think Sonar is doing good things too, right?
Yeah.
They just announced that new flatbed consortium that is bringing in more data from a flatbed standpoint, and that's forcing DAT to grow too, right? And their offerings, and so it's just going to get better and better. Um,
I think
Now, go
innovation by
ahead. Yep.
necessity too,
Yeah,
obviously, because
for
we
sure.
have more players now in this space than we ever did in
Hmm.
trying to capture pricing data as well. And so we'll have more options now for trying to collect data or benchmark. And I'm seeing people now start to, there's so many topics that I feel like we're going to lead into. We're going to try to get
Yeah.
to API pricing too and
Right.
dynamic pricing, right? But
Right.
like when you start thinking about how people are building their algorithms to price that out, they now have the ability to like be pulling in multiple different data sources and blending those when
For
they're
sure.
creating their pricing or benchmarking their pricing. So I think
Yeah.
that's really cool. But yeah, I think we have to give credit to what's happened in 5 years in this space when we're talking
Totally.
about data
Totally agree.
and benchmarking.
Yeah. I think it's also important to think about internal benchmarking, right? What your current carrier base costs and market adjustments that need to go where that's concerned. Can you get contract agreements with direct carriers? How does that look?
Yeah.
Even feedback from RFPs are a great
Mhm.
benchmark. I think
Mhm.
a lot of the time we just, okay, did we win or lose? Throw that out the window, move on to the
Sure.
next one.
Don't
But
ever do
we,
that. If
yeah,
anybody's
don't ever
listening,
do
don't
that.
ever do that. Yeah,
Exactly.
always
I
always
mean,
the follow-up. Yeah.
yeah.
Got a couple comments coming
Yep.
in, and I wanted to talk about, Cody said, "Great topic. Pricing in 2024 is going to be a bigger challenge compared to the last 18 months." I love that because I think that we all thought,
Oh,
oh, and also good morning, Todd. He's here as well. Um,
nice.
I think that we were all kind of hopeful that something was going to be shifting in the market mid 24, and it
Hmm.
still very well could, right? But now we're not so sure. And so if we're looking out into
Yeah.
2025, I think that there's just more question marks than we had originally anticipated around 2024,
Hmm.
unfortunately. But I also think kind of what that topic is relative, in my opinion, to would be 6 month and 12-month RFP cycles.
Yeah.
Like this is RFP season. I know several large shippers that are launching next week, next Monday. Things are opening up. We're going to be going through a couple month process of rounds and validations and onboards. And so as everybody's getting into the RFP season, and I'm sure you'll be kept busy as well here coming up, but
Sure.
what should we be thinking, and how are we trying to pay attention to, kind of like I said, those macroeconomic sources, or just different things? Like, what are we thinking about in terms of looking at a 6-month RFP versus a 12-month right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, the short, obvious answer is predicting the immediate future is versus extended future is a lot easier, right? So if you're looking
Right.
at 3 or 6 month bids, I mean, obviously you have to look at seasonality, but like if you have dedicated capacity in like a short-term contract,
Mhm.
obviously you're going to have a higher acceptance rate even in
Right.
periods of seasonality. So affected costs have to take into consideration expected swings, and sometimes benchmarking can't tell all of that full story. But if we're looking at 6 and 12 months, I mean, at Dupre, we predict the future based on the past, right? And that's just the nature of it. And
Right.
if that's a 3 month look into a 5 year window, obviously the past 3 months are going to be a better indicator. But we're using DAT currents and forecasts. We're also looking at our historical data internally. Then we definitely look at economic data. So like I said earlier, PPI, industrial output, supply dynamics, and the historical movement of all of those, right? Because they're good predictors. And then of course market intel. Outlets like FTR, ACT, ATRI,
Sure.
ATA, all the acronyms, right?
Yeah.
That we're looking at.
And I also love that more companies are getting into publishing research and reports too. And I always tell
Yeah,
people, like,
for
hey,
sure.
work smarter, not harder, right? Like, we already have some great companies. I think Uber does something, Arrive does something. I do a monthly update report. Like, we're all kind of out here now being a lot more like public with sharing information, and like
Hmm.
for the sake of education and understanding what's going on. And I think that's really cool too. So you do have like the FTRs and the ACTs, which I've used before and I love. You have to pay for them, right? So it's
That's
kind of
right.
cool, especially for these smaller companies now that can start to say, hey, other people are paying for these, and then making some
Yeah,
information public. So
exactly.
that's been pretty cool to be able to like see more people just getting excited about understanding the
Yeah,
markets, specifically within how does this pertain to how we're going to source and price our
yeah,
freight.
for sure. I
So
think
it's
the
really
the
awesome.
most yeah, for sure. But the most important of all of this though is your relationship and the value add you bring, right? So if I'm looking at a 12-month bid, um, to me, the most important thing is prep. It has to start months before the anticipated RFP release, right?
Right.
Most customers are going to be sending it on the same cycles, unless some are trying to get ahead or postpone relative to where they think the swing is. But um, what I would say to that is there's strategic internal meetings involving leadership, account management, carrier management, supporting staff are
Yeah.
vital. I mean, doing a SWOT analysis on your lanes, labeling corridors where you're seeing success. How can we capture more inside of those? Just an actual plan and communicating that to the customer.
I would just
That's to me the
say
most important.
super interesting that you bring this up, because like I told you earlier, I sat on the other side of this. I was a seller. I worked with pricing teams.
Yeah,
And that was the number one thing that I heard from pricing teams, is that like, come to us with a plan. Because when
yep,
you are looking, I mean, I worked in the enterprise space. So when you were looking at thousands of lanes, like,
yep,
what are they supposed to do with that? Are they supposed to
yeah,
go through and try to apply really good intentional pricing to every one of these lanes? And yeah, we talk a lot about like there's tools now to help with automation, there's ways to speed it up. There's some pretty cool companies out there that I've been talking to, doing some pretty cool things there, but that still doesn't, it would still be nice, obviously, for a brokerage to be able to go, okay, let's look at this with a spotlight based on where I have capacity, where my carriers
right.
match, and just different things like that. But thousands of lanes and multiple RFPs all hitting in the same seasons, a pricing team is going to prioritize, in my opinion, the sellers who come to them and say, I talked to the shipper. Here's the origins that they say brokers perform the best out of. If it says, this type of equipment, they say that they want it to go with a different provider. Like, there are so many different things that you can come into to be prepped for an RFP. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. It's like,
Yeah,
it'll drive me up a wall when sellers are like, I don't know, we just got an RFP. Like, let's do it. I'm like, what do you
right,
mean? Like, where's the plan here? So
right.
that's a big part of my consulting work, is like RFP strategy prep, and then involved during the process. And then, like you said, we don't throw it out when we're done. We lose, we learn from that, right? We get
Yes,
feedback, we get ready
for
to
sure.
apply it to the next one. Otherwise, doing the same thing over and over again and like expecting different results, right? Isn't that insanity?
It's
So
insanity. Yeah, that's
make
the
sure
definition.
you're learning. I can't tell you. We had some RFPs that would roll into the pricing team and they would be like, we've done this 5 years in a row now with no feedback, no
Yes,
awards. Like, why would we keep doing this?
for
So
sure.
yeah, we have a lot of people, obviously, I think are feeling what I'm talking about here and agreeing. Edward says internal communication and alignment are key and can be overlooked. Great topics.
Right.
Very much so. So we
Yeah,
hit on a hot spot there for sure.
good.
I want to talk about one negative I think that I've seen
Okay.
on these RFP cycles, from the shippers, like from what some things that I've seen shippers do maybe that
Mhm.
necessarily don't help themselves a whole lot because
Right.
I think that there's a give and a take when we're doing when you have partnerships and when you're in pricing, right?
Mhm.
So you run an RFP, you're hoping to get good engagement, you're hoping to get good results, and you want those to be the awards you make, you want them to stick, and you want it to work out.
Right.
Um, two things I think that I would like to ask. Number one, what are some things that you've seen like lacking often in an RFP that
Mhm.
are laughing at Abby. Good morning, Abby. That are not that don't help basically. Like you're like, I'm missing
Mhm.
this. And it's just like if I could just have this, it would make a difference in how we could price this freight. And then
Right.
the other thing I'd like to talk about is like timing of RFP cycles because I have been in some 6-month RFPs. Like it
Oh, yeah.
took 6 months to run the bid, make the awards. Oh, we're late on the awards. Oh, we're validating. Oh, we need a redo. Okay, go live. And then go live gets
Yeah.
pushed out. And I'm like, this was a 12-month RFP and we put
Right.
4 to 6 months into this. Like I've seen that happen. And
Yeah.
so how does that also impact shippers, do you think?
Yeah. Now your predicted price is 18 months out, right? And
It
not
is. That's
accurate
what
at
I'm
all.
saying. Like that's
Yeah.
so crazy to me.
Yeah. Yep. No, for sure. That one you mentioned, I mean, obviously that's asking for your freight to go to the spot market, right? On a higher clip. And so, man, this could be its own podcast. And listen, I know that price discovery is going to win 90% of the time, right? Because of budgeting for supply chain, transportation
Sure.
costs are usually planned 3 months before, like your budget's usually planned months ahead before the RFP releases. You have CFOs, cost center leadership, procurement, yearly results, operating margins, like all these things that they have to consider. So I'm super understanding of that.
Yeah.
I guess some things that I'd love to see from a pricing standpoint
Yes.
is more flexibility percentages, right? Baked
Mhm.
in, being built into rates that are awarded. A little
Right.
different than an index-based pricing model, but which is kind of more spot centric is contract centric. If 80% of your freight is ran by 20% of your carriers, could that go to 90% of your freight and reduce exposure to spot market? With predetermined flex based on your rates and the market movement. I mean, I feel
Is this
like that could be a
index-based
huge win.
pricing? Is that
No,
kinda
no, I
no?
kind of think of it more in well, it can be. It's just more of a built-in percentage flexibility. And personally, that could be on the downward side too, like as long as we have a agreed upon flex. So more in the contract. Index is been traditionally more in your long tail or spot freight. So this would be a
Sure.
little bit different for where that's concerned. I think it could be a powerful way of predicting spend better for our customers too, and strengthen relationships because you have your core carriers are kind of accepting more volume. But I do know it's a two-way street, right? I mean, customers that are on this call could say, well, brokers and carrier community, have to continue to honor commitments, right? They can't just
Sure.
reject all this freight. So I know it's a two-way street, but that'd be something I'd love to see. But on
Right.
to your main question on, obviously in the actual RFP coming out, better demand planning that is more accurate to
Mhm.
predict the volume. And I know this will never be an exact science, right? Can the margin of error be reduced? On both parties can plan for capacity, service, revenue, profitability. Um, this will reduce rejection rates, not only because of
Yeah.
flexible price, but because demand volume was more accurate. I know customers, and I do know customers are working on this, right? Like they're not not trying to get better at predicting volumes better, but I heard a stat the other day that some of the largest asset carriers expect up to, I think it was like a 40% turnover rate in lanes from the previous bid cycle. Um, yeah, I'm sure a lot of that has to do with that demand planning.
Right. It
So
wasn't
that'd
what
be
you thought
something.
it was. You honor the commitment, but you're not bidding it again for year 2. That
Right.
happens a lot in brokerage and in the asset side as well. And I think
Sure.
like just from experience and from seeing behind the curtain now and talking with and working with a lot of shippers, I would say that number one comes down to like resources constraints on
Right.
maybe technology. It's not even capturing data for lanes and volumes in a way that's even like easily useful. That's a big one, depending on what
Mhm.
systems they're operating in. And then I think where I've seen some companies absolutely just like hit it out of the park and then some really fail is when you naturally have a more seasonal product or good that's moving and you don't break your RFP out by monthly volumes.
Right.
Like, because if I see that there's 300 loads a year in this lane and I'm like, whoo, I'm an asset, like I can get,
Right.
almost one a day more or less, or like maybe it'll
Yeah.
be two a day, like how it breaks down.
200 during
And then
June.
you end up with 200
Right.
in 2 months
200 in
of a
June.
peak
Yeah.
season.
Right. Right.
Like,
Yeah,
what?
it's
And what do you,
yeah.
and I think the thing that we have to, obviously, this should be pretty common sense, but especially when we're talking assets, or a lot of times you have brokers relying on certain asset partners in their network. And that becomes tricky too, because then you become the person that's like
Yeah.
promising them a certain amount of volume, and then it's not what you thought it was. And so I don't know how many times, like after awards would go live, as a broker, that I would have to like keep track, like run reports on tenders we were getting. And you kind of have to give it like a 2 to 3 month period. And then you go and you look like, okay, for this quarter, am I on track to hit the volumes it
Mhm.
said I was going to be awarded? And
Yeah,
sometimes the answer is not even close.
for
And then you
sure.
go up to them and you're like, hey, is this going to be seasonal? I need to know so we can prep. And the shippers are like, I don't know. We might have just forecasted wrong.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
difficult, right? Because that's
It
also part of like
is.
forecasting a brokerage revenue or a carrier's revenue. It's like, well, how
Yes.
many loads are we going to be handling? What are we looking at? You have to staff appropriately. So, man, like shipper forecasting is so important when you're
Yes.
talking about creating those partnerships. And to your point, I think obviously you're going to see a lot of people still do the right thing and honor commitments no matter the volumes. And so, yeah, it's not the end of the world. But I do think you see people fall off of those and you create churn within your network for the
Right.
next year. And that's just
Yeah.
more work for everyone because you
Yeah.
have how many load planners now adjusting to new contacts on the lanes. They can't stay in contact with the same teams. And that just creates operational inefficiencies all around, I think. And it's
Yeah.
it's just unfortunate because we're talking data here. It just is all coming back to data, right? The
Yeah.
quality of the data that you're putting out there.
Sure. Yeah, I think another thing I would add to that too is what I'd love to see is more pre-negotiations. The appetite for more pre-negotiations
Mm,
and not just price discovery. And just
yeah,
some customers are doing this, right? And those are
yeah,
succeeding in their route guides. I think a little bit more having their main carrier base be able to move up and down relative to the market before the RFP versus pushing to the bottom of the barrel. And
sure.
scraping the bottom, which has improved a ton, right, since COVID. I mean, COVID taught, I think, on both sides, like the value of having partnerships and not just trying to save the most money, right? So
I think somewhere we're seeing progress, and we're gonna go a little long today, but that's okay because I want to
yeah,
touch on a couple more
that's fine
topics. But
for sure.
I think that to that point, what we saw during COVID that was also happening during the time that we were developing better technology for pricing and something called
Hmm.
API rating
Yeah, for sure.
for the truckload space. Like, what I think that's where I see shippers trying to lean into more strategic conversations
Hmm.
with brokerages and carriers. I just talked to a decent sized carrier actually who's getting some requests from some of their partners to start doing API rating for drop trailers and things like that. So this is
Yeah,
a growing need, and that's why I want to address it today because I think unfortunately there's a lot of brokers out there who are like API what? Or like even carriers. And I
right.
think now it's becoming so common, like not common, but it's more accessible now that we need to stop thinking of it as reserved for the multi-billion-dollar organizations.
Yeah,
And so
for
what does
sure.
that look like now? What are you seeing in the market as far as like ways that it's available or how that gets put together and how can your 50 million, $100 million brokerages and carriers be handling these conversations and
Yeah,
trying to plan for what I really think is the future. Which
yeah,
and I think it already is here. Like we're going primary routing guide, skipping to dynamic and API. There are
yeah,
no routing guides
for sure.
anymore, like across
Yeah,
a lot of companies. So, what are your thoughts around
yes.
API rating and how we can start adopting that better?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. I mean, you know, you can build it in house if you have a sophisticated IT department, or B you can purchase it. Right, there's a lot of automations out there today, two heavy big ones, and then there's some others that they're building out.
Right.
you know, it's getting more affordable. It is expensive, but it is getting more affordable, and I do think it's the future. I think, we talked earlier about um, index-based pricing and how
Yeah.
that's kind of getting some traction today, and that's not like a new idea. That's been
Yeah.
around for quite a while. I remember back in the day, years ago, we would tie it to customers' spin in the spot market, right? And then as that moved, we would tie it up against, let's just say, CAS, their truckload index. And as it moves, okay, if it moves above a 3% threshold, then it opens a conversation. Today it's more tied to a benchmark, like we talked about earlier. That triggers a reprice monthly. It has pros and cons. I think it's something that if you're a 10,000 load shipper and you have 80%, the 80/20 rule, and then you have this long tail of freight, I think it's a great. Or if you're a mega shipper and you kind of want to just have one or two carriers and be in that environment, that's something that is getting a little bit of traction. But
I would
I
say that,
personally, oh, go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
and we're gonna jump into API. I bet that's where you're going.
Yeah.
But I would
Yeah.
say that
Sorry.
people might not like me for this, but I don't think, and I think index is gone. Like, I think it
Yeah.
had its chance, and like
Right.
it took so long to get traction that now that we have API, and maybe I'm wrong, but like the number one thing that I always turn back to people when they ask me about index is like, well, who determines what basis? Because it's almost
Right.
always some form of a cost plus model, is what we used to call it. Now we call it
Yep.
indexing, but even
Hmm.
indexing is basing off of a benchmark. And so, who
It is.
determines what that is? And understanding that there will always be providers and players in the space who are absolutely capable of buying under that benchmark.
For
And
sure.
so when you set up an index-based pricing, you are leaving opportunity out there, which is why I'm so interested in API, because
Yep.
API is companies saying, here's my best foot forward based on our data, how we buy in the market, what we're doing internally, how we're
Hmm.
choosing to rate freight. And you can do an instant call to 10 people to see what rates come back on one shipment and
Yes.
set up your systems to auto tender to lowest cost to whatever like preferred. And you skip the indexing portion altogether because
Yep.
you're able to understand how different people are buying in the marketplace and what they're willing and comfortable to price at.
Right.
And I could be wrong again, but I'm saying, like, I think that index, I'm like done. I'm over it. I'm
No, no,
excited
no.
for
I
what's
think,
next. And like, I want to talk, I think it's like,
yeah, for
I
sure.
can see how it still has some use cases. And I think another thing is, shipper technology has to catch up too. Like, not all shippers have the
Hmm.
ability to lean in fully yet to the API and the dynamic side of things.
Right. Right.
So indexing might still be a little bit closer to what they can accomplish. But if I was a shipper, I think I'd be moving forward to embracing the next chapter of that, which is API, in my opinion. What
Right.
do you
Right.
think?
I mean, there's no truer transparency of market as a instant rate back from 20 people and then
Yeah.
benchmarking that yourself, right? Like
Isn't that cool though? Like, that's
if
what's
they're
so
all within $100, then like, okay, this is
sure.
the market, right? If they're like
Yeah.
$700 difference, then okay, maybe this is just not, we're not appreciated, or whatever you might say the reason is behind that. But um yeah, I totally agree. It is the future. Platform based was the first, right? You have the E2 opens and emerge and carrier point, etc.
Sure.
That's still heavily, that's going to be the largest portion of the market today. And then your mega shippers are going to start doing the direct APIs. I think that'll start trickling down over the next 5 to 10 years. The old models will be in the past. It'll be direct, and you'll have your own algorithm internally bumped up against a benchmark.
I
I think
don't
that's
think
that's where it'll go.
that I want to put a caveat in here, and that, like, to what you do, especially on the contracted and like RFP
Yeah.
side, I don't think APIs will replace contractual awards with
No.
committed partnerships. That's
Oh,
not
for
what
sure.
I
For
think.
sure.
Like,
No, no,
I
no,
don't
no,
think
no.
we're going there. I think we're saying, like you like, let's say it's an 80/20 contract to what ends up in spot for your business. I think the 80 becomes, we have a primary, and then the
Mhm.
20 is all the small stuff, all the tail stuff, and then anything that primaries reject is API, and that's it.
Yeah.
I don't even know
Right.
if we're going to see like these load boards anymore, where these bid boards. And if we do, even if we do, huge fan of automation on bid boards, right?
Oh,
And
for
so,
sure.
like, letting the
For sure.
brokers or the carriers embrace some type of, again, algorithm that I remember 4 years ago, when like we were 4 or 5 years ago, that was like, oh, don't let the shipper know you're using an algorithm. You
Right.
couldn't do that because it was like
Right.
frowned
Right.
upon if you didn't have a person quoting the freight. But I
Right.
think that, like, hopefully shippers can start to understand that that is allowing your brokers to be probably more aggressive and more timely and like be a better volume player for you as well. And so
Right.
I think that there's just so much going on in the transactional marketplace side of
Yeah.
pricing. I think the
Yeah.
contractual is pretty much, there's not a lot that's going to change there. And I don't think it needs to. I think it's like you need to know who your primaries are. And that comes down to operational efficiencies from all
Yep.
sides.
Yep.
Because you can't, asset carriers can't run in a purely API marketplace where they don't know what's going to happen until that day or 24 hours before. So the contract freight stays important. And on the shipper side too, you don't, like, how frustrating would it be if you were like a load planner or an analyst and you're like, well, I don't know what 5 people I'm going to deal with today. And like
Right.
everybody's trying to learn your processes for the first time over and over again, especially if you have
Yes.
any type of specialized, refrigerated, like it just doesn't work. So there's
Right.
definitely a place for the API and the transactional to be automated, but we're never going to get away from the importance of strong contractual commitments and partnerships.
For sure. And I think you bring up a great point on shippers being scared around like a bot or automation pricing, right?
Yeah.
I want to make sure this is clear and that customers understand there are a lot of humans involved in automation.
Thank you.
Like
Thank you.
there's it's not just, hey, set it and forget it, right? Your profitability and service is going to suffer majorly. I mean, with our automations, I mean, we have decision trees that are a mile long, right? Nighttime, weekend pickups, multi-drop, permits, seasonality, holiday adjustments, etc. You have to have eyes on that.
Sure. And I know it's like
not,
machine learning, like type of idea, but it has to learn from somebody, and it's like the people are telling it what to do. It's just automating the really menial tasks. I do the same thing in sales. I'm a big fan of, people they talk a lot of crap on like sequencing for emails and stuff, which I do too. If you're just blasting out the same thing over and over again, but from a sales like workflow perspective, from a daily person's workflow, you can set sequences up that give them manual like reminders that you need to write this. But like the guesswork is gone, and like you're just focused on perfecting your craft. But like we're automating as much of the process as we can to help people be more productive. And in my mind, like that's the sales version of what's happening right now in pricing and the operational side is we're using tools to automate what can be automated and help, but you can't replace the human thought and intentionality that's going into those algorithms.
Yeah. And it's not just the day-to-day visibility, right? But like real strategic review. I mean, that's what I task my leadership in the pricing division and the analysts that we have, like to meet with account management to discuss, right, wins and losses, the adjustments need to be made to profitability. We see, a lot of heavy volume requests from certain areas, and we have to learn from that. Like, okay, how can we aggregate that with our committed carriers and stuff? So it's a lot of thought leadership and strategic review that goes into that. So it's not just a bot like, hey, just let that thing price at all. It's heavily human integrated.
I have one last question because like we're really out of time here.
Oh, we are.
I had to ask this because this is something that I've heard discussed lately, and we kind of touched on it when we talked the other day. So I think let's just keep it to 2. There's 2 pretty common ways you can approach brokerage: cradle to grave models from an operational standpoint, and then a split model from an operational standpoint. In my opinion, those 2 models, you price very differently and you interact very differently with pricing opportunities. Now, I've never myself worked in the split model, like in a day-to-day, in the cradle to grave model, but just by nature of how it sounds, understanding that the same person is finding the customer, pricing, and sourcing. I think the biggest constraint to me there is that all of your capacity is staying in one little spot. Like the carriers that they're contracting and the data they have is running right there. And somebody else in that brokerage isn't utilizing that or able to understand that pricing and apply it. And so do you think that there is a cradle to grave? Is it a little more difficult from a pricing standpoint to try to take a more like holistic approach into types like RFPs and stuff? Because I just feel like your data is so siloed, but maybe I'm off base.
No, for sure. I mean, we've spent the last couple of years at Dupre moving towards a split model, and very, very heavily just over the last 6 months. And we started with pricing probably a year plus ago. And, before that, I mean, it's obviously very decentralized, right? To your point that you made, office manages the RFP. It makes it very difficult task when you think about like managing larger customers. You do have in-house knowledge, which is key, right? You're that branch manager, that account manager is tuned in to where that's concerned. But if you when you move to a centralized, you can have a group, right? That can then has seen customers in the like vertical, So if you're in
Right.
retail, well, I can bring experiences from Walmart or Target into your other retail conversation, feedback from those and into those same verticals. A lot of them are in the same corridor. So in the split model, you just have the ability to be more customer focused in your RFPs.
Mm.
So yeah, and get ahead of the event, the things we talked about earlier. So it just makes more sense in the split model because you just bring way more knowledge, right? And it's a team effort versus just
Yeah.
a smaller team effort, a larger team
I
effort.
would love to hear from people in comments even if you listen back to this, because I know that there's so many people who interact in both of those different models and
Yeah,
kind of how that comes down to pricing efforts and what you've seen. But I also think it's interesting that um, I think that's something that shippers oftentimes don't think to ask their
right.
providers is, hey, what's your operational model? Like
Yeah, yeah, and
just
I
to
think
understand, like not that it means that they can't perform one way or another, but I do think that
mhm,
it means they perform differently. And so understanding what their operational model is will kind of help you understand how their carrier sourcing is, and then that
yeah,
kind of feeds back into their pricing.
I think
Um,
even but sorry, on the spot side, I think the spot side is affected even more from in the cradle to grave than in the split model. I mean,
yeah,
when we were started the automation conversation, we started looking at all the accounts that were within the offices, looking at the larger suppliers. Say someone had like 100 loads per day. Someone is spending 4 to 5 hours manually quoting that in,
yeah,
right? That
it's rough.
they are very no, and they are very hard workers that have carriers to talk to if you're in a cradle to grave, like PODs, billing, customer service, etc. They don't have the time, right, in the day. Moving to a split model and then having some automation inside of it, now that person can be super customer centric, right? Relationship building
Right.
and dealing with customer service. It just you get an advantage that you didn't have before. Like you're guaranteeing that pricing is going out the door versus like someone who's just bogged down with like 3 or 4 large accounts and then has this other one they may not be winning in as much. So it's I see it even more on the spot side where you see your advantages in the split model.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually I'm all for people sharing shout outs and promoting other companies. Is there been any companies that you guys have partnered with that have helped guys on the API journey or the pricing journey that you want
Yeah.
to maybe
Oh, for sure.
suggest or put out there just so
For
people,
sure.
because I think people might be listening like, well, where do I start? What do I do? Who do I talk to? Like, what are my options? And so like just not that this is a commercial for anybody else because it's not, but like from your
No, but I
experience, like what were some companies that helped you guys get started?
yeah, so DAT, once again, I mean, we know it's the largest aggregator of data, so we use it. We've talked to green screens, they're doing great things, like I've said. On the
Yeah.
automation side, I would plug ABRL. I feel like Chad and his team and what they're doing is a little bit ahead of the competition, and but I appreciate the competition too. I've met with them, and they're doing good things too.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're looking, you got HubTech, but ABRL is our choice, and they're doing great things for sure.
Well, I love it. Would love to hear from people too who are exploring these options and starting to get more into this. I'm working towards finishing up a research project too that I'll be sharing with everybody along these notes, just kind of trying to help people better understand because I'm pretty passionate about like I do think this is the future. So how do we help people get there, right? What are
Yeah,
your options to get there?
definitely.
So really awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. This was the 1 year
Yeah.
anniversary. We went long. I
Hey.
don't even care. It was great. It was a great conversation. And I think that this was a really, productive one. And hopefully we have some people thinking. Definitely got a lot of people to fired up on the RFP strategy and communication. So
Yep.
would love to hear more people's thoughts in the comments on that. I'll be responding to some things here after the show.
Yeah.
But overall,
Yeah.
just
Thanks
thank
for
you so
having
much
me.
for jumping on. It was a
Yeah.
great conversation, Matt.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I'm gonna go play some piano now. Is it that
Yeah,
schedule?
right. Your
Yep.
classical piano
Okay.
there. And
Yeah.
you guys don't forget if you want to head to Manifest and see us there. I'm trying to get Matt to go. So we're working on that. We're gonna
That's
see if we can
right.
get him out to Vegas.
That's right.
I think it's funny. I think all pricing guys should go to Vegas. It's like I kind of
Yes.
joke that you guys gamble every day anyway. So
That's right.
um,
That's right.
we'll try to get him out there. But there's the link again. It's in comments if you guys want $200 off your registration. You want to support Meet Me for Coffee. Reach out if you want to do some content short clips while you are in Vegas with Meet Me for Coffee. We'd love to collaborate. And you guys have a great Tuesday. Thank you so much for
Yes.
meeting us for coffee today.
Definitely. Thank you all.